Yo, what's popping? So I'm going to go over each team in this tournament and their strengths and their weaknesses, how I think their strengths will help them win, how I think the weaknesses could maybe bring them to an early loss or just loss in general. And I'm going to start off with the East region. So starting off with Philadelphia, I got the schedule that how they got here on the screen in case you were trying to remember anything. Anyway, so obviously the strength of the Fusion is going to lie in MN3 and Zest. That's how it's been this whole season. And if they can pop off and outperform the otherwise subpar, right, for this tournament at least, core of the team, and that's their weakness, is they have the weakest core in APAC for this tournament, right? The charge backline's better. This and then the Junker Queens and backlines for Shanghai and Seoul are definitely better as well. You can argue, oh well, maybe Krong's better than Fury or Fury's better than Krong. Doesn't matter. Neither of them are nearly as good as Void or Smurf. So that's where Philly's weakness lies. And another weakness that they have that has plagued them also throughout the season has been the consistency of their DPS. We've seen time and time again that Zest and M3 are able to do fantastic feats like bring Seoul to map 5 or make a pretty deep run in the midseason madness. But we haven't had that consistency. Even in the midseason madness, the run was stopped short because Zest and M3 were unable to perform in that lower bracket when it got to the very end. They were able to beat the Spark, but after that, they were a little bit flat-footed against Atlanta, right? So that those issues, I'm not sure if they can really go any further. They're probably a better pick to win the tournament than Charge, but I think Charge is a better team. But Philadelphia, they have that potential that Charge just doesn't quite have right now. And going over to the Charge, their biggest strength, I think, has been that Choi Se-won's finally showed that he can fit in with this roster. He's feeling himself. He's back to playing the level I think he should. They were able to beat Fusion whenever he wasn't in, but I guess M3 was in, but he wasn't playing as he was in that final week. But will he be able to play as he did against Chengdu and Spark against the Seoul or Shanghai Dragons? It's not known yet because he hasn't really gotten a fair shot at them this whole season, I would say, with how poorly his team around him was in the previous stages. So if Choi Se-won is able to step up in that next gear that we know he has, that's a huge strength for this roster, and he could propel them to maybe some upset map wins or even an upset as in total, if we're being a little bit optimistic. He could maybe bring Charge somewhere that you wouldn't expect the Charge to go. But the weakness with this roster is that Krong is solid, and the backline's solid, but are they good enough to really be great? Because we see the Seoul backline, the Shanghai backline are great. So those teams star-studded throughout. There's nothing solid about their teams. They're all good. Great. Good to great. I would say maybe the Charge backline's good, but is it good enough to outperform, Vindame and Profit? Probably not. And that's going to be a key difference maker. It's not that there's a real weakness with this roster other than Krong, probably, right? I guess that is the real weakness you can narrow in on. But even besides that, even if he has been getting better at the Junker Queen, even if he has performed up to a standard level that is good enough, is it actually good enough to beat the better teams in this region? That's the biggest question mark with the Charge. But now, Seoul Dynasty. The strength of this team, well, their whole team play has been solid. They've all been very good. They're fantastic at following up with damage. You'll notice especially, you'll see that Stalker is able to finish off on any of Fit's damage really good. You even see Profit in that last match against Shanghai. Even though they got 3-0'd, he was still getting really good opening picks, whether it be from a whip shot or just an aggressive shield bash or whatever it is. So they're very good at that. But the weakness of this team is, well, first off, comparing them to Shanghai, because that's their main competition here. If anything other than first is kind of a not really good enough for the Dynasty. So we have to compare them with Shanghai. Can Fitz compete with Lip? Because we saw he really didn't in that last match. I think Lip definitely had the upper hand throughout that whole series. And he needs to compete at Lip's level for his team to have a real good shot. And also that Profit's Brig playstyle, which, while I just said it was a good job and he did a great job on following up on kills and being able to get that little last bit of damage in, it also made him a bit more exposed and exploited by Shanghai, and he was able to fall much more often than Izayaki, who is playing a much more trying to live as much as possible, to get as much value through his life as he can. So that's the biggest on the roster. And as a team, can they match the Shanghai Dragons' tempo? Because we saw them consistently get out-tempoed by Shanghai, And I don't know if they can match that tempo, even set it themselves. They either need to slow down the game a bit or they need to match it. And I'm not sure if they're going to be able to do that. Um, I think they'll have better chances of trying to slow it down, but how do you slow down Who Are You? Which goes into the next team, the Shanghai Dragons, which their top strength as a team, as a player rather, on the roster is Who Are You is the best Genji in the world. I'm not going to even pretend that Sparkle or Proper are at his level, because he is like put on this earth to play Genji and he plays it damn well. They only lost one map this entire stage against the Philadelphia Fusion. That also goes to show Philadelphia maybe, but that's insane. And I already touched on it about how their tempo is so fast. Their tempo is likely because Who Are You can just go in on a dime. He sees something, he's immediately, even if he doesn't see something, he'll make him something happen. He will find an opportunity, he will create one for his team, and that's why Shanghai is so good. And Stalker is also an elite Genji. Don't get me wrong, but he's not doing the same things Who Are You is doing. And Who Are You is just doing so much for his team to set tempo even. It's I don't know. The Genji Who Are You is just so damn good. It kind of sets the tone for Shanghai. And I think that's what they really needed as a team. And it works out beautifully. And the weaknesses is, well, it's a Shanghai Dragons. So I don't know what you can really say as a real weakness, but there was some moments in that last game against Seoul where, like, on a control center, they would get a little overextended. They would go a little too deep, a little bit too full of themselves, you could say. Sometimes Li Zhegang was getting caught out, but that's your standard Li Zhegang. But still, so maybe they could get a little over ambitious, a little over aggressive, and that could bite them in the end. But it's Shanghai, so there isn't really a whole lot of core weaknesses with this team, unless they maybe go too fast or something like that. It's more so them tripping over themselves. It's hard to exploit that unless you try to. No, I don't even know. It's just very hard to exploit that. Anyway, going over to NA, we see the bracket once again, and now let me make sure teams. Here we are. The Florida Mayhem to start with. So Florida, their strength is that, well, they're playing some weird compositions, right? It's forcing teams to deviate how they normally play. That's how they took a map off of Dallas right there. They were on the double flex support on Hollywood. Dallas didn't have a solid answer at that time. Maybe they do now. Who knows? But if you're able to take a team off of the best team in coming out of NA after these qualifiers pretty solidly is Dallas. You're able to take a map off them. Maybe you're able to take multiple maps or even a match off of a different team off of a better team. But who's to say, really? And that strength that they have is also a weakness in turn, because I'm not sure if those compositions are really strong enough against the top teams. Like, they were able to take maps off of Dallas, sure, but they weren't actually anywhere near beating Dallas. And that's what you have to do. You can't. It's not good enough to just take maps. You have to actually win 3 maps in a match to win, right? So it doesn't matter if you're able to take 1 or 2 with your double flex support. Eventually you're going to have to win in the mirror somewhere, somehow. And they haven't shown to actually be a better team in the mirror against many teams except for Paris, New York, and they were able to beat London in that very first match of the season, of the qualifier. But London didn't have a hand on the meta at all. They were on the Reinhardt, they were on the Sombra. It was not a good look. And they quickly shifted away from that. So Washington's strengths are also their or not Washington, Florida's strengths are also their weaknesses. And I don't know. I think it's more of a weakness than a strength, but it is a strength in itself. It's a bit of a weird. It's a double-edged sword, right? But now talking about Washington, we have the Washington Justice, and they are the Washington Justice, right? So that's our weakness right away. Washington Justice, get that out of the way. But the strength is also they are very aggressive, and they have a high mechanical ceiling with Decay, Assassin, Kalios, who had the highest Junker Queen numbers, I believe, going into last week. I don't know if he still does now after that tragic 3-0 loss, but it shows that he can have that high caliber of damage. But that aggression, again, is also a weakness, because we saw Houston was very easily able to exploit it and just absorb that aggression, target down Kalios, and then Decay and Assassin never showed up. They didn't have any space to show up because Kalios was always dead. He wasn't actually doing anything with that aggression. And so that aggression, while it also is a boon, it is good for them, it's also very bad because it can get misplaced often. And it didn't even come close against Houston. So unless they're able to tone that back or at least place it better, the aggression will be all for naught. So it's kind of a strength and a negative. Again, similar to Florida, that is kind of how a lot of teams work that are in that like middle of the pack, like barely squeaking in kind of phase of the seeding. But at the end of the day, they're the Washington Justice, so they're good for a map 5 somewhere probably. Where it is, I don't know. Now the Vancouver Titans. So Vancouver strengths as a team, they have very good engagement still. I like it. They know how to disengage together. They know when to disengage well, and it results in favorable fights oftentimes. And they also have Spire, who can just go and kill 5 whenever he feels like it, and that's the main strength of this team. However, a big weakness is I think King is probably, in my opinion, the worst Genji in this tournament in NA or in across both regions because there's no bad Genjis in APAC. In the tournament at least, yeah. So I think that is a pretty big weakness, just not having a Genji that is up to snuff, really, with the rest of the competition. And to me, it felt like they were a little unsure of themselves in that 3-2 reverse sweep loss to the Boston Uprising. They had Aspire on the Ashe as much, and I don't like that look for them. I think they need Aspire to be there. They hit those 5Ks to be that pop-off player, and it's a much more difficult time for him to do that on the Ashe. So I would appreciate if they would maybe just stick to the Sojourn and have more confidence in themselves as a team, because they've showed that they can compete with the Toronto Defiant early in the stage, and then, well, nothing a whole lot past that. I mean, Washington, so they're at least mid-table, you would say, but they still do need some real solid proof that they can compete in that top 5 area, I would say. We'll see. It's gonna be kind of a challenge for them, I think. Next up, we have the London Spitfire. So I think one of the biggest strengths of this team is they touched on it. They were doing some interviews. There's been a lot of interviews going on, because I know Custom did one with Spilo. I know Yiska did one with Sparker, and there was someone at the desk. And they were talking about how they have a very good environment as a team, and it kind of rallies them together. And I think that is a very good buff. I think London, it's hard to say because we don't know the insides of everything. This is kind of like nothingness, right? But at the same time, I think there's some value there, that they are the ultimate for-fun team. We used to say Atlanta's a for-fun team. London is the for-fun team. Atlanta kind of outed themselves this season as maybe not actually a for-fun team. Maybe. I don't know. But London, I think, are the core for-fun team in this tournament, and that's always dangerous. There's always a little bit of danger there when you're a for-fun team. They also have Sparker being able to kill 5, and they have a pretty decent core. Their core isn't exceptional. We're not seeing Admiral and Landon go off and make huge plays. Like they're no like big whip shots and things like that. And they do have some questionable missteps, of course, but they're solid. And that solidness can also be a weakness, because is it good enough to be solid in this tournament? I already said that was a weakness for the Charge. For Spitfire, is it good enough? I don't know. It's hard to say. I think it's all right, which is, I guess, what solid means. So it's kind of a nothing point, I guess. Anyway, but to the weaknesses, Backbone is another weaker Genji in NA. I think there are very much 3 Genjis that are quite below the competition, being King, Backbone, and even Aldo to an extent. Sometimes Aldo's able to show up, sometimes he isn't. He's very inconsistent, which I guess I'll talk about Toronto after this. But Backbone is just a weaker Genji in this tournament. Yeah, sometimes he performs really well. Like against Houston, he had a very good match. He was able to show up. Against Toronto, he came alive on Circuit Royale. But he needs that consistency in this game before I can call him a very strong Genji. I'd say average. You can call him average, I guess. But for this tournament, what average is has to take a step up, because you've got rid of the bottom 5 teams. That's just how it goes. Now, onto the Defiant, the home team. So that is a strength and a weakness right there. Home team, home crowd advantage. Are they going to crack under the pressure, or the pressure going to propel them to greater heights? That is always a question when it comes to these homestands. I'm choosing to believe greater heights. That's why I'm calling it a strength, but it could be a weakness. It's going to be one or the other. Most of the time, they're not neutral. All of the time, teams have a preference, I would say. So there's that, but there's also their actual gameplay. They are probably the best Ashe abusers in the game. Now, you can argue Dallas for sure. Easily. You can very easily say Dallas are the best Ashe abusers. But Toronto are probably right with them, or maybe a little below if you're being pessimistic, or realistic, depending on your view. So that is a very good strength on the maps where Ashe is probably the better option to play. It's also a weakness because you're probably not as good as a Sojourn against a lot of teams. We saw it against London even. London outperformed them on the Sojourn comps quite handedly. We'll see if how much that impacts. So Toronto should be able to manipulate map picks around the Ash pick as much as they can. But other teams will do that back, I suppose. But there are more Ash maps than there aren't, I think, if you're the Defiant, which is a big factor into how far deep you'll think they'll go. But besides just that compositional pick, their backline is so good. Like whenever I'm talking about a solid backline, Toronto have a better than solid backline. You'll see Twilight and Charon make great plays. The support outs are very well placed. They never die. And another thing with Twilight just has that ability to say, we are winning this fight. It looks really rough. He'll pop the rally and he'll just kill everyone. Or he'll live long enough for his team to get back and they can kill everyone. They have that like a titanium backline they are not going to break, and definitely have that like comeback potential just from the backline alone before even factoring in Hisu or Hoppa or Aldo, I guess. And they're going over to their weaknesses. Again, I've already touched on Aldo, but sometimes he just disappears. And you can't have that if you're actually trying to be a top 4 team from this tournament. You kind of need better than a Genji that will just disappear at times. He has to be there the whole time. He just has to. There's no way around it for them to actually want to place well. And then, of course, again, the Sojourn maps. There may be a slight downsizing, degrade. I can't think of the word. Decrease in skill, maybe. But it's not like Hisu's bad at the Sojourn. It's just as a team, they are better at the Ashe. It's not on Hisu. Over to the Houston Outlaws. So Houston, biggest strength is they have the scariest DPS line in this entire tournament. And the NA side of the tournament. I would say Who Are You and Lip are a bit scarier. But I actually would rate Pelican and Merit together to be scarier than Sparkle and Edison, than Kilo and Proper. Straight up. Like, they're so consistent and they're so scary this qualifier. While consistent, maybe not that 3-0 win over London. That was a little inconsistent. But this team has been so good from Pelican and Merit. And if they keep that up, they are like the best DPS line in this tournament, I think, very easily. And then the rest of the team can back that up. They can work well enough with that team. Their team's not really slowing them down. There's no real weakness that you can exploit on that team. They're just solid all around. But the weakness of Houston is that it's Houstonable. It's always Houstonable, right? And Pelican has always kind of faltered in these tournaments. In these past 2 tournaments, he has not been able to completely play at that level throughout the whole tournament. We saw flashes like against Defiant in the kickoff clash. He came alive on Colosseo. But in the midseason madness and in the kickoff clash that next match after, I forget who it was against, but he didn't have that same performance that he needed. And that's where Houston will falter. Now going over to the San Francisco Shock. Proper, as a player, controls the pace of a game more than any other player in this league, I would think. Maybe you can argue Who Are You controls it just as much. I think that's fair because of how fast Who Are You plays. But Proper just controls the game. And if you let him, like Dallas Fuel didn't let him control the game as much as he normally does. But if he's able to control that game, Shock are in a much better, advantageous state than otherwise. And that's really where Shock's biggest plus side is Proper being there. But also, Violet's had a pretty good showing on the Lucio. Finally, I'm going to come around and call him better than average on Lucio. Yes, he still has some moments where he will be a little out of position. He'll be a bit too aggressive. But it's kind of like the Leisure Gone factor, only it's on Violet. That's what I figure. I think his beats have gotten much better throughout this qualifier, and I'm sold on Violet, so I don't have a problem there. And I don't have a problem with anywhere else on this team. But I also don't have a lot of other strengths. Yeah, so anyway, going over to their weaknesses, Kilo needs to be on his A game, or else we're going to get another moment where Edison just diffs him, and Shock are constantly on the back foot because of it. You cannot just afford to not have your Ashe or your Sojourn, because he was on the Ashe a bit. Yeah, I think he was on the Ashley 1, actually, on Dorado on that one map. But you just can't, you need him to show up and be there, because he has disappeared at times. Sometimes he's able to outperform, and sometimes he isn't. That's just the nature of Hitscan, I guess. But for a team like Shock, you kind of need him to step up. Another thing with the Shock is they are very aggressive as a team. Sometimes that aggression can hurt them, similar to Shanghai. I think that Shock and Shanghai are similar in a lot of ways, but not quite. That's not the point of this video, I guess. But they do misstep quite a bit. Finn can go a bit too out sometimes. Kilo can kind of isolate himself at times and have someone like Sparkle jump on him and kill him. And things like that. Mostly the backline and Kilo. I don't think Kaluge goes over aggressive very often, but the team around him does. I'd say Proper does as well, but Proper has the skill to back it up, has the results to back it up. That I'm not going to worry about proper in that respect. Um, but those are my problems with the Shock. But they're very small problems. Like, relative to the rest of this league, pretty small. It's only real problems against Dallas, I would say, who I'm going to talk about now. So the biggest strength for Dallas is their hive mind. They always seem to be on the same page. They always know what's going on. They're just a hive mind. They are one mind. They run together. They ride or die together. It's all that stuff. It's the Dallas Real Hive Mind. It's back, and across the board on the roles, it's pretty much elite play, I would say. I don't know who you would say isn't elite. I guess you could claim Edison, but he's had a pretty good qualifier. I'm not sure if he's at that elite caliber yet. He's not with a Sparker, I don't think. He's not with Merit even, but he has been very solid. I've been A tier at least this qualifier, and that's very scary in itself. And I guess you could say Shock have that as well, but no other team has that other than Shock and Dallas, I would say. And the weaknesses for this team is, well, like, how do you have a weakness here? There have been better hit scans in Edison, I would say. Like I said, he hasn't been S tier, but like you can't really exploit them on that even. I guess you could say when a hive mind, when it's wrong, like when the hive mind as a team has the wrong decision and they commit ults to a losing fight, they really lose hard because they will commit to it and it will throw multiple ults at that wall, and maybe it won't work, and that could keep them on their back foot for a little bit, but that's not so much of a weakness. Dallas don't really have any easily exploitable weaknesses. You just have to play better than them, and that is very scary. That's a very scary thing. There's no way to really prepare for Dallas or like say, oh, we have to focus this and we'll win. You just have to play better, and that's why Dallas is very scary. You have to play better than them on the given day of the tournament. But yeah, that's gonna be it from me. Let me know your thoughts down below. As always, like this video if you like and subscribe for more daily Overwatch League content. Yeah, have a good one. Deuces.